It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
As soon as we get the dialogue. All right. Welcome to today's podcast. Regular podcaster, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Chad Jetner.
I'm Peter Lawrence, and joining us today is Zach Tollefson.
Hey there.
And Zach is going to talk to us about, I don't know, we'll see, cloud anti-patterns maybe, and some other fun stuff, right? So Zach, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a developer within the Java practice here at SDG. I joined September of last year.
Nice.
Since then, I've been on one client, worked on AWS technology with that client. I have an AWS Developer Associate certification. I'm currently working towards the Solutions Architect Professional certification.
Nice. Those are tough.
Are they, Peter?
Yes, they are.
Because you got the, you have the. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
I do have the Solution Architect Professional and the Associate both. But yeah, it's a tough one.
I am working towards.
They expect you to know stuff.
Yeah. I've been trying to dedicate a couple hours a week, a few hours a week to studying towards the Solution Arc Professional, and we'll get there. I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah. If they don't invent new and greater services.
Yeah, and if anything, AWS really just likes to take a pause on presenting new services and technologies to the users, right? They do that so often.
So
it's really easy to stay on top of that stuff. Yeah.
I lucked out. I took it before the last change, so I didn't have to learn as many services. But
well, not to tout SDG too much. We always we love working here. One of the cool things though is anytime one of us takes the test, the knowledge sharing around that is pretty slick. I think who did we have that just passed the Solution Arc Pro? Is it Singh?
I think Sang just did. Yep.
Yeah, he just got his, and he took meticulous notes, put together a little study guide through Udemy. It's pretty cool. So.
Well, let's not talk about certifications because that's not our topic for today. Let's talk about, I don't know, some anti-patterns. What's a good one to start with, you think?
So I'm the one that actually proposed the topic, and I was trying to think of a couple. I think it's like one of the big ones that I fell victim to early on is just like not really establishing clear deployment patterns, right? Like, hey, we're standing up all of this stuff and we're not, and it's easy to get excited about standing up AWS infrastructure and then manually going through all of these steps and then not doing some form of automation and repeatability around it, right? Like, you don't want to be the guy that has to click, through the AWS console for, 30 different things every time you need to instantiate a new environment or a new stack or a new whatever. That's my biggest gotcha with a lot of this stuff is not thinking about repeatability from the get.
So Zach, did you have any experience with that side of things at all?
Yeah, I've worked quite a bit with some of the infrastructure as code pieces within AWS, like CloudFormation and the Cloud Development Kit, CDK. And it's honestly great. There's a lot of tooling out there. That's the other one that's more independent, open source.
So Terraform or serverless?
Yeah, so I think nowadays there's so many resources on how to automate this and build infrastructure as code, create code pipelines through GitHub Actions, GitLab. AWS has its own code pipeline. A suite of stuff that almost no excuse not to try to learn those technologies to automate the deployment strategies as much as possible.
It's funny, when I was starting to use some of that stuff at a client, we had automated it so well that I was unable to find it quickly in the console itself. We're like, wait, where is this in the console? I don't even remember where that goes. Like, I don't remember which one it was, but some of those things that are done sort of behind the scenes, and especially as a shop matures and gets those tools in place, sometimes you don't even go into the console, right? And don't need or don't have access to that kind of space, but you can still code it and have it release infrastructure for you. with the infrastructure as code and get that out there. Chad, did you eventually automate yourself back into Sanity?
Yeah, eventually. And so we used like some of the earlier tools that AWS have, and I was just actually checking to make sure that it's still a thing. We used AWS OpsWorks, right, which was their kind of customized implementation of Chef and Chef cookbooks and all of that stuff, right, which isn't necessarily like Terraform, right? You're not really automating like the creation of services and everything else, but it did provide us, prior to joining SDG, I was at a much, much smaller company. It did provide us a platform where we could write some simple cookbooks and, Ruby scripts to build out, and deploy our code, and then have OpsWorks manage all of the ephemera between, application server and database and web servers, and, kind of obfuscates a lot of that stuff away from you. So I was a huge early all in on OpsWorks for a lot of that stuff.
Yep.
And it was solid for a very long time. And then I handed it off, and now we're doing much cooler things with Terraform and all of the other tooling.
Yeah.
I don't know. Zach, have you ever used OpsWorks? I used to love it. I
have not personally used OpsWorks.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, it was a neat idea. But I think it was an instance of AWS kind of like taking open source Chef, putting their own little top spin on it, and allowing you to build out like different layers to your stacks and then different environments on top of those. I think it was geared towards developers that didn't necessarily want to do DevOps, and it let us be kind of hyper productive fast. But then the it's an 80-20 rule. The 20% of the things that we really wanted to do, I mean, if you wanted to integrate all of that with AWS's API gateway, well, that's something that doesn't really exist. So you got to configure gateway by yourself, and there to configure these other things by yourself, and that's when you got to start writing your own Terraform or whatever script to create those services. So yeah, it was really cool until it abruptly wasn't.
And I mean, that's how a lot of these tools go, right? They push into their own space and not to bleed across too badly. So like, Chef was for that configuration more than it was for the instantiation or infrastructure as code. But it was also been around for a long time too, right?
I want to say I started using it around like 2012, 2013-ish maybe. That might be an exaggeration, but I'm not far off by much. I haven't, like, they had other tools out there, like Elastic Beanstalk is a thing that looked really, really cool when it came out.
Yep.
I haven't actually touched it. I haven't played with it too much, but it does seem like kind of like a Google App Engine kind of thing, right? Where you just give it a deployable artifact and you spit it in there and it creates your auto-scaling groups and everything else for you. That actually seems really cool. Would love to use it, and I actually might use it if I'm building my own thing. But like, those are the kind of things, like, we build massive projects for clients, and we talk about all the automation infrastructure around that. But then we get to our own personal little side projects, and Elastic Beanstalk seems like perfect for that kind of a that kind of a situation.
That size.
Zach, have you touched that at all?
I wish I have. It seems like great for personal POCs or things you want to get up really quickly.
Exactly that. Like quick and dirty POCs, and really, like, if I'm building out side projects, and it's not to say you couldn't build an enterprise app around Beanstalk, probably. But like for personal side project, I want to write the code. I want to build the cool stuff, and I don't want to worry necessarily about connectivity between all of the AWS services out there. Was Beanstalk on the test, Peter? Give me a.
Yes, it was. Was
it really?
Yes, it was.
Right.
It's been a while, so don't quiz me with any cool questions or anything like that. So back to sort of some of the anti-patterns that we've been talking about. Security is another one of those that kind of is something that people. Is security an afterthought anymore, or is it front of mind now?
You're asking me. I'm going to say it's. I'm going to say it's front of mind. Right, knowing how much of a pain it is when you treat it like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you get all your services stood up and you get everything built, and you don't got your VPCs set up right, and you don't have your security group set up right, trying to go in and retrofit all of that stuff after the fact. I've done that. It's not fun, right? It's just something. So if you're talking about a security around like, network security and all that stuff, yes, that is, do it first.
So that's the anti-pattern. Wait until you're done with everything and then add security afterwards. And so by having that be the anti-pattern, you say, no, really, do it first.
And especially around if the application you're building for has to do with anything that has to comply with HIPAA, PHI information, that needs to be front of mind. I think most businesses are pretty good about, keeping that front of mind, like signing business associate agreements and all that. So
yeah, but as programmers, sometimes you don't even think about sort of the PII aspect of things, like what might be PII to you or not be PII to you is a different thing to, I don't know, lawyers or someone else, right? There's different levels of personal identifiable information that you can tag back to a person. But that's a good point. Like that's something you should think about sort of at the start of everything and not try to delete things after the fact or clean it out and have, sort of made up data, right, as you're going through development time and then get to real data and be like, oh, wait, so security numbers should maybe be not in there, not stored.
Exactly.
All right, Peter, what's the next one? Give us another anti-pattern to talk about.
So
you got a
scaling,
nice
scaling is a cool one. Always start with the biggest EC2 instance that you possibly can and ratchet it down, or
I mean, yeah, do that, especially if it's not your credit card that the account's under. Or you could go the other way, right? So I actually struggle with that one a little bit because and Zach, maybe you've had something similar happen to you, but I kind of I create problems in my head before they're actually problems, right? And I try to solve. I'm trying to slay imaginary dragons, who, by the way, I think they're coming to Target Field in July. I'm going. I'm excited. But yeah, you're trying to slay these imaginary dragons that you really don't worry about it, right? Like, don't start mediocre is what I say. Like, just don't go insane right out of the gate. And then create for yourself a performance benchmark that's based on a bill that's not sustainable with, whatever, that doesn't really match with whatever your situation is that you're developing.
Some non-reality based infrastructure is not the way to go.
I mean, it's all reality, right? If you can fire up the instance size and if you can do all this stuff, that is a reality that exists. It's a reality that doesn't necessarily need to exist.
No business that I've ever worked at has said, yes, please overspend as much money as you possibly can because we've got a pile of money and we just need to set it on fire.
There's paraphrasing, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's the really nice thing about auto scaling groups, right?
Yeah, that's true. As long as you pick your instance size appropriately and don't overcommit. Another thing that when I think about scaling is sort of complicating your infrastructure a little bit, sort of by making it, if these 12 steps happen perfectly every single time, then yes, we've got this. And if they don't, then, well, maybe we'll just add some more here or there or something like that, right?
I have another one, Peter, and I don't know that this isn't on the list here, but I think one of the biggest mistakes you can make with things like AWS and other providers as well is not doing enough due diligence or not doing enough research around all the available services, right? Like when I started doing AWS, when I started doing development and deploying my stuff to AWS, RDS didn't even exist yet, right? It was EC2 instances and S3 buckets, and that stuff was all neat. Our architecture evolved a little bit. The solution evolved a little bit beyond that. But I kind of stopped paying attention to the other stuff that was available to me, right? And so I started writing solutions that I didn't need to because there was an AWS service for it that not only did it better, but did it better without me having to have another deployable artifact and support, you
didn't have to test it or anything like that?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that anti-pattern is really just not doing your research and not being aware of what's available to you and not engaging with folks that would know, right? Like we have, depending on your account size, you'll have an AWS rep that can help you through some of this stuff. You can describe your problem and they'll walk you through like solutions and things on the horizon. We were early adopters in a previous gig of AWS's API Gateway.
Nice.
And it was kind of the same situation though. Like we had a problem. We saw API Gateway. We looked at the brochure. You got to dive into this stuff a little bit. You got to do POCs on some of this stuff a little bit. You got to actually know what you're getting into when you decide to use a particular service.
Yeah. Related story. I was on a client developing conversational AI. So within AWS, there's a few relevant services. Amazon Lex, which is the sort of the chat bot that you can create, and then it was just a basic chatbot that we needed to create. Like I was sort of newer to the world of cloud computing at the time. Like you were saying, Chad, there's just so many services that I just know like what I didn't know. So really just leveraged my previous knowledge of Amazon Lex and Lambda from a previous project. But there's this whole other really cool service called Amazon Kendra that is just index-based learning, and it just totally missed it. Luckily, we had an AWS account, a solutions architect with the project, and given like the problem, they saved so much time versus trying to like custom create this chat AI within Amazon Lex and within Lambda. So
sure,
totally get that.
I mean, that's the other thing is that get an expert, right? Don't just throw darts at the console board and see what service looks good today, because maybe that's really not what you need. Maybe you need Kendra, or you only need Lex, right? Depending on what you're trying to do.
Totally.
So that makes good sense. Anything else around scaling to mind?
I think Zach kind of touched on it, not using auto-scaling groups, right? It's kind of tied into what I was saying about not knowing the services that you're provisioning, right? Like understand how you can auto-scale some of your stuff. Understand options available for these performance bands, right? Like I use, I'll go back to OpsWorks. OpsWorks had a lot of cool tricks that you could do if performance metrics in the VM itself got hit, right? Like it could spin up more EC2 instances. It could spin up more database replicas for you. It would do all this stuff. I don't know that we're still recommending OpsWorks to manage infrastructure anymore, and there's other ways to do that. I don't know necessarily what they are,
right.
But not taking full advantage of the automation around scaling within AWS is a huge anti-pattern.
Yeah, huge no.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar around pricing on auto scaling versus just a static number, like a static price for a certain EC2 instance that you provision. Do you guys know if it's more expensive to configure an auto scaling group versus just a static EC2 size?
Everything has a little bit of cost associated with it, but you can also use that to your advantage, right? So you can start smaller and scale up only when you need to have that level of service, those kinds of things. And you can choose different types of EC2 instances to, sort of, have them either reserved or just spun up as time permits or as need permits.
Is that true though, Peter? For some of the services around scaling, like the ability to auto scale, I don't know if it costs anything additional. You usually just end up paying for the actual resources that auto scale instantiates, right?
Yeah, to talk about cost a little bit, there's a lot of sliders and knobs that you can play with, right? You can spin up different types of EC2 instances, I forget what the term is, but sort of on demand versus so reserved or just a plain old instance, right?
Yeah, there's on demand, there's spot instances, there's reserved instances,
right?
And that's probably another great anti-pattern around pricing, right? Like once you've got a baseline for performance, make damn sure that you're using at the very least reserved instances for a lot of this stuff. You're going to save so much money by requesting reserved instances and doing that kind of forecasting
doing that
ahead of time.
math and seeing what your load is, right?
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass to kind of do it, and it's kind of guesswork a little bit. But my goodness, you're going to save. I'm trying not to exaggerate, but I think when I did this previous gigs, I was able to cut like 30% off the bill just by switching to reserved instances for a lot of my, at least at the very least, a lot of the EC2 instances that ended up getting instantiated under the covers, right?
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, make sure you're using reserved instances is a huge one.
And just knowing that there are different types of instances, right? And that again is like know the system, know what the costs are. The costs are, I will say, clearly spelled out for you. I won't say that they're clearly spelled out in boring spreadsheet. If you do this is how much it will cost, but they definitely spell things out, right? Zach, anything with the cost? Have you dealt with those kinds of issues at all?
No, but I hear a common complaint about the cost breakdown can be sort of cryptic depending on what cloud provider you use.
We'll just call it more detailed than you were expecting. How about that?
Yes.
So another anti-pattern is talking about data, right? And the different types of data storage that they have, and just picking one and sticking with it, or not picking one. And between Aurora and names are escaping me, but all the different data services that they have, SQL instances, MySQL instances, database server on your own EC2 instance, which seems crazy to me. Yeah, that's one of those.
I can't think of a reason that you would ever want to manage and build your own like MySQL database on an EC2 instance, not taking advantage of all of the like knobs and switches that RDS provides to you, and all of the automatic like logging and configuration and security. Everything around RDS makes it seem like if you're thinking, if you think that you can manage your own MySQL database straight on like bare metal EC2 instances, you've got two problems. One, hubris, and two, you didn't read enough about RDS.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Like, I know one of the other things that we're going to talk about is sort of spinning up classic services in non-cloud ways, right? Using a non-cloud architecture to do cloud things.
Let's talk about data a little bit more though, because and Zach, you've used RDS before, right? For some of your projects.
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
That's a pretty common one, right? So it gives you so many cool things that I've had to do manually before. And I've got a fun story. I actually asked this question when I interviewed folks, like, what's your biggest screw up as an IT professional? What's the one thing that you did that was like the biggest, dumbest? And I've erased production databases before because I used to set up MySQL instances on bare metal. You point the wrong one as the replicant and the other one as the primary, and you are in for a really bad day, right? As opposed to just going into RDS and saying, hey, man, I want to create, replicas. I want to have a read-only replica, and I want this many of them, and I want them spread across this many regions. And also, if you wouldn't mind, there's a little checkbox for encrypting the data at rest. Like, all of it is so insanely, ridiculously, stupidly simple, right? It's hard. It takes a concerted
effort to do it wrong,
to screw it up. Yes.
You talked about writing over production data with empty. Backups and things like that are another thing that you want to still do, right? Even though it's the cloud, it's not perfection, right?
Yeah. I mean, set up your snapshots. Keep as many of them as, I always kept a lot.
It's easy to automate the EBS volume snapshots. Just have one every morning at 2 a.m. Keep the last 7 in your set.
And again, that's a tool that's there that, in the olden times of maintaining your own hardware, maintaining stuff on the metal, you're making your own backups. You're making sure they happen. There's probably even a service that will tell you that your backup failed in AWS or succeeded. Whatever your comfort level of notifications are, there's tons of things that will allow you to keep on top of your services without actually, checking in and looking at them every single day, right? Anything else with data?
Encrypt it. Check all the boxes, right? I mean, you should have this is data especially. I mean, we should be writing like checklist manifestos around data, right? Make sure you're encrypting it. Make sure you are replicating it to at least one other region. Make sure that you're taking appropriate amount of snapshots, and then make sure that you've actually gone through the exercise and practiced disaster recovery event, right? Like throughout all of it. And AWS makes that so simple for you. You just click on a snapshot. You say, make this guy, make this wooden boy a real boy, and it will create a database for you off of a snapshot. It's not hard, but you should absolutely practice it repeatedly, and understand, all of the consequences of that. I would also say with data, if you're setting up read replicas, right? I'm talking specifically about RDS. I'm not really talking about the document databases that are out there and anything else. I'm talking about transactional databases. Make sure you understand your lag and your performance penalties that come along with read replicas and replicating data across regions. Make sure you understand the performance metrics that you're going to see, and make sure that you understand how to recover from from replication pauses. I've seen it happen a lot when I did this stuff across regions, right, across AWS data centers, where replication will just stop working for whatever reason. Also, especially with this, make use of your AWS support representatives. If you've got a support contract and you've got any questions, oh my God, these people are ridiculously good at helping you walk through issues with any aspect of what's going on with your data, right? It's the one thing that you just got to be freaking meticulous about every aspect. Like, I could lose my application code, I could recreate that. I could lose everything else, but if I lose database, I mean, game over, man. So
it's gonna be a long weekend, or a short drive to the liquor store, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Zach mentioned GitLab earlier, right? You've worked with like GitLab hooks into some of the AWS resources. There was a great story published by GitLab, I think, or I don't know if GitLab published it or if one of their engineers published it, about the event that they had where they deleted data, right? Like, they deleted a production database. They did what I did. And I didn't get a clear sense that it was an AWS event, right? It sounded like they were doing the anti-pattern of running a Postgres database on bare metal, right, and then just managing it all themselves. But man, those guys lost. They lucked out by only losing like 6 hours worth of data out of and that's pure luck. It just happened that one of the engineers took a snapshot of it and they were able to rehydrate from that. But man, oh man, that is a nightmare scenario. You really don't want to procrastinate, and you don't want to cheese out on costs around protecting your data.
Back up early and often. So that's talking about fire drills, right? Or disaster recovery, or things like that. That's another one of those anti-patterns that a lot of us don't stop and think about as often as we should. So Zach, what's your best fire drill, or do you run fire drills often, or destroyed production databases at will and see what happens?
I haven't worked on all too many production databases within AWS where I'm responsible for infrastructure, setting up infrastructure and fire drills, luckily enough. So haven't had the unfortunate sake of deleting data or anything. But yeah, it's all part of the at least for AWS, well-architected framework for disaster recovery. I think it's part of the reliability pillar. So don't have too much of a perspective there, but game days and setting up game day plans and having a standard emergency, or some sort of documented guide at least, is definitely good to have.
A plan and at least practice doing. I mean, part of the success, I think, for a lot of this stuff has been the automation of, infrastructure as code, being so able to spin up infrastructure that kind of practice by spinning up infrastructure every time you do a release. Not necessarily your data infrastructure, but that kind of thing. I don't know.
Have you guys done any of the chaos engineering stuff? I know Netflix has an entire suite of tools around chaos engineering where they literally run this stuff in production, and it randomly simulates pulling a network cable out of the wall or deleting a cluster of data in your database. And anytime it finds an event, it alerts, and you gotta, they actually build around that. I have never been that brave to do that
No.
anywhere. But I find the idea fascinating, and that would be a fun thing to talk about one of these days, Peter. Is like go through the list of chaos engineering tools, actually do a demo of some of them against maybe, I don't know, STG's production website, or our instance of whatever tools we use. And let's not tell Kyle. We'll just do it.
We'll just do it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we don't actually have anything go wrong ever normally. So that's a good test, because things run so smoothly that they never break or the website never goes down, which is awesome.
I do have some experience with, writing unit tests and integration tests for infrastructure as code. So if you push like a bad config on a service, you're not going to totally break down, your application. So you can mock up services pretty easily in the AWS world and connect those together. I think that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to, write reliable test infrastructure in the cloud.
Yeah, and
that's actually a cool idea. I haven't done that before, Zach. So like you're writing unit tests specifically to test like a Terraform config against a service that gets deployed out there to make sure that it's valid configuration and everything else. Is that
exactly
basically what it is?
And I think that's forget what it's. I think it's for AWS. So the AWS software development kit for Python at least is Bodo 3, and then for the mock version of it, it's Modo 3 mock. So highly encourage people to check that out.
What I was going to talk. I had a question. Oh yeah, Chad, this is kind of directed to you. I know talking about costs of things. Is the cloud always the right solution?
I don't know that it necessarily is. Right. I mean, I think it's worthwhile now looking at what is it that you're building,
right?
And potentially not just constantly defaulting to an AWS deployment, an Azure deployment, or a Google App Engine, or I'm sorry, Google Cloud deployment.
Right.
I think there gets to be a certain scale where it almost makes a little bit of sense to do some of this stuff yourself, right? Like AWS is operating at their profit margin is, I think I saw like 35%. I mean,
so you're saying there's some room in there to DIY? I
mean, I'm not saying not to, right? Like, look at it, right? Look at your local providers and look at what that might get you. Do you have simplified needs? Do you absolutely need to have AWS's version of Lambda functions? I mean, I think the reason to stay at AWS is all of the glue that they give you that you can tie around your application, right? But if you get to a certain size where some of these things might not necessarily make sense. I mean, if you're still doing basic MVC, like a model view controller type application, a web page with a database, right? Do you need AWS for that? Is that actually going to give you, once you get to a certain user base, is that actually going to give you everything? Is it actually going to make sense financially to stay there? I mean, I'm just saying, look, once in a while, right? Like there's folks that are stepping away from the cloud, right? And just really not whole hog stepping away, but just taking a breath and saying, hey, everybody just kind of takes it for granted that if you're building something, it goes here.
Right.
What if we didn't?
Right. So if you have some infrastructure already, that might be an easier conversation. If you're trying to whip up infrastructure, it might be a challenge. And so then, but it's still a good thing to look at, right? Like, am I making the progress and getting the benefits that I need or that I want out of this service? And is it doing it the right way for me, for my company, that kind of thing, right?
And even like there's other services out there, like Heroku is still a thing. For low-end applications, I mean, you might just need something like that to handle, all of your infrastructure. You don't necessarily need to go whole hog into an AWS environment. Heroku still works. Beanstalk was created, I think, as a direct answer to things like Heroku. So
sure,
look at those a little bit before you just decide I'm going to go all in on the AWS. I don't want to call it a monolith because it's super flexible and it's super agile but you really need to know ahead of time that you're making the right choice before you make that time and financial investment. I mean, and for me, it's really just the time investment, right?
It's not going to say, it's not like you come into this knowing everything, right? Everything you knew before getting to the cloud, you just applies 100% and is super easy. You do have to think differently, act differently, learn technology, learn different ways of doing things, know what a Lambda is, know how to use it, know whether you want to write it in what language or anything like that.
Yeah. Zach, have you done any of the other like the low barrier to entry services like Heroku deployments or God, there was another one. I can't think of what the heck it was though, but it was very similar to Heroku where you can just create your deployable artifact and say, hey, this is going to connect to this database. And then boom, you've got an environment and it actually kind of auto scales for you. Right?
Heroku is pretty nice for that. Yeah, it just totally depends on your use case, I guess. If staying on-prem, hybrid, going to the cloud works for you. I've worked with for a company where HIPAA is a huge concern. Going back to that again, so data residence is a huge factor for those kind of companies that deal with PHI and PII. So, for them it makes sense for at the moment just to stay on-prem with all their existing hardware. So. Yeah, really case dependent.
Yeah, so sometimes spinning up the infrastructure to maintain that integrity and that separation of concerns might be more than you want to bite off to move to the cloud, right? When you've already, maybe worked your way into that separation naturally over time at your own on-prem type application. So there's the anti-pattern of single subscription, right?
Yeah, I mean, going all in on a single vendor. I used to work as a kind of a subcontractor of sorts for IBM, right? And everybody's always fine if they go with whatever IBM solution is out there. Right. And now it's AWS. You're probably not going to go horribly wrong if you pick AWS as your single vendor. And I feel like the risk with going with a single vendor that is AWS, pretty goddamn low, right? Like they're not going anywhere.
It's changed quite a bit, right?
Yeah. However, you do have like North Virginia goes down still sometimes, right? And when North Virginia goes down, everybody goes down with it. So it's a risk. I don't know the last time AWS seemed to lose an entire data center. I don't know if you guys remember. It seems like it's been a few years.
I'm not sure if it's been a few years, but it's been less than two or less, I think, since they've lost connectivity. But again, maybe that's another anti-pattern, right? Make sure you keep all your things distributed across, not necessarily services, although services would certainly make it easier to cover those kinds of contingencies, especially when you're doing infrastructure as code. And a lot of those different tools can, work across the different services. So you can create Terraform that works in AWS and also works, obviously there's some caveats to that, but also works on Azure or Google.
It is kind of nice though, like if you're on AWS and they lose a data center, they'll hear about other services going down before they bother you, right? Like, or maybe you can just say it's like the XKCD comic strip, right? Like two guys are out sword fighting and they're like, and the boss comes around, what's going on? And the guy's like, AWS is down. So, oh, okay, continue on.
Right. So I mean that is one of the challenges, right? Like you are somehow, some way, some magic code takes out all of AWS. You will not be alone, but you will not be happy either, right? So still have to do all of your backups and all of your security and your migration and your scaling and your costs and your data. All of those things still need to be done, even though it's the cloud. We do some parting thoughts?
Should we do some parting thoughts?
I think we should. Chad, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I would just say, biggest anti-pattern that I can think of is not knowing your tools, right? Like learn your tools, become intimately familiar with what AWS services are out there. Best way to do that, take a study exam for some of this stuff, right? Like learn what you have out there, what's available to you before you try to solve a problem, right? Like I'll give you an example. This is a long parting thought, but oh well. Sometimes it seems like the AWS folks are mildly telepathic, right? Like before, I had a use case I needed messaging, right? And we had a couple of weird scenarios, and SQS didn't really seem to cover it quite yet, right? I think it got there. And so we did one of the anti-patterns. We stood up our own service. We just stood up ActiveMQ on AWS, right? Ran it on an EC2 instance, and it worked, and it was fine. And then the telepathy comes into play when a week later, AWS actually said, hey, introducing AWS ActiveMQ. There's a whole service around ActiveMQ. You don't got to stand up your own anymore. There you go. So I guess, learn your tools, be patient with them sometimes, and keep in touch with your representatives at AWS. Like, they know, what's on the horizon. I didn't do that in that case, and wasted, not a ton of time, but the time to configure ActiveMQ and do all the nonsense around that. If I had just talked to the dude, probably would have let me know, yeah, man, we're building that out. So hold tight.
Don't hold your breath, but watch for an announcement next week. I'm just saying.
Right.
Mike, how about your parting thoughts?
Yeah, totally agree with Chad. Is just knowing your problem and then applying the right solution to it. I think it does take a lot of experience with AWS to get acquainted with the services and just knowing what's appropriate and what's not, and how to do it in the most cost-effective way. So until then, I think you just need to rely on, a lot of if you have a representative that you're working with, great. If not, there's a lot of solutions articles out there that detail a lot of common use cases that may or may not be applicable to your own. The AWS blog is great, as well as just some, open source information on the net. So just try to learn as much as you can.
Nice.
Oh, Zach just brought up a great point, Peter. I'm going to double down on, or I'm going to throw in another thing. Follow some of the AWS advocates on Twitter. Jeff Barr is one of the guys that I follow. He's, I don't know what his exact title is anymore, but he writes a lot of these blog posts that Zach just talked about. And literally, like, if you just follow that one dude, you'll probably do pretty well keeping on top of brand new AWS services or capabilities, whatever, right? So follow a few of these guys, have a feed just for this stuff, and you will be amazed at how easily, even having tangential information about a new service, knowing that this, AWS Cognito was a thing, right? Oh, okay. That's probably going to help you a ton when you're trying to solve, for identity providers or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
knowing it exists makes it a lot easier to use than not knowing about it at all, right?
Yeah, and then building your own OAuth, blah. Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
Nobody. I'll just say my parting thought is pay attention to the cloud. It's here to stay, but it doesn't do everything, but it doesn't do nothing. So it makes sense most of the time. And STG certainly has the expertise to help you make that decision if you need help. But yeah, it's right for almost everything, but it's not right for everything. Thanks, everybody. And hopefully time to say goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. See you guys.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.